My family just came back from a trip to Washington, D.C. We went out to Washington, D.C. last week. And by the way, Ashton, thank you for filling in for me. Steve, thank you for all you did. Everybody that came in and filled in the gaps, thank you for what you did last week. It takes a lot of people to get this thing moving forward. But we went out there and enjoyed the trip. It was a good trip, but we walked 20 to 30,000 steps every day. Every day it was 20 to 30,000 steps. If you want to work out, go to Washington, D.C. You know, you don't have to go to the gym. You don't need a gym membership. Just go to Washington, D.C. and say, you know that thing right there? Just walk to that. That thing that looks like it's right there. Just walk to that thing, and you will get a sufficient workout. From the Capitol building, you can see on the screen there, from the Capitol building to the Lincoln Memorial. So the Capitol building is the closest thing, and the Lincoln Memorial is that little tiny white thing in the distance. Between the Capitol building and the Lincoln Memorial is 2.5 miles. That's how long that is. We always see it in one picture just like that. We see it in one picture, but they're squeezing that in that picture. You know, that's a long distance right there. So you might say, today I'm going to go see the Capitol building, and then I'm going to see the Lincoln Memorial, and then, you know what, if we got a little bit of time, let's go see the Jefferson Memorial. What kind of time do you have? Those are different states. You know, they're just a long ways away from each other. And actually, you can actually go into a different state. You can go over to Arlington Cemetery, be in Virginia. So when we went there, we were doing a huge workout. And by the way, if you've never been to Washington, D.C., I do recommend going. Everybody should go to Washington, D.C. There's so much history packed into that city. So they can't even put all the history into all the museums that they have. Exhibits have to take turns because there's not enough space in the city to show you all the history that's packed into Washington, D.C. But the thing that amazed me the most about our trip was learning how historically conscious our founding fathers were. Right now, I'm not thinking when I go home today, I'm going to keep this fork because that's the fork I used on this day in history. And we're going to go ahead and preserve that. I don't think like that. I just use the fork, and then I throw it in the sink. That's it. I don't think about that. Our founding fathers, when they started this country, they knew that they were starting something huge in history. This was an experiment. The way they were going to set up our country, this was an experiment. And they knew that they were living in history. They were a huge part of history. They had sculptures and masks made of themselves so people can know what they looked like in the future. I have never had a mask made of myself. Never even thought to do that. I've never thought, you know what, for my great-grandchildren, so they can know what this moment was like, I'm going to do this. No, I just lived the moment. I was just living life. But they understood that they were going to pass this on to the future generations. Thomas Jefferson duplicated every letter he wrote so he could archive those letters. We have those letters today. George Washington spent a massive amount of his final years organizing and indexing his public and private wartime papers so that they would outlive his lifetime. We even have his expense report from the Revolutionary War. It's right there in Washington, D.C. You want to know how much that cost? Check it out. The report's right there. If you're into accounting, there's something to see there. You know, you can go see George Washington's expense report. Our founding fathers knew that they were making history, and that needed to be passed to a future generation. And we experience what they worked for. We see that today. We experience that today. You got to know where you came from and why you are where you are. Otherwise, you repeat the same mistakes your ancestors made. And we don't want to do that. The men who founded our country understood that a nation survives only if its people remember where they came from. Because if you forget where you came from, you may return to it. So you've got to know where you came from. This principle is established in the book of Joshua. Joshua has just led the Israelites over the Jordan River into the Promised Land, which was not just, it wasn't your typical river crossing. It's not like, hey, let's cross the river. Missouri River is a dangerous one. You can just go try to cross that. If you don't do anything but walk across it, chances are we won't see you later. You know, it's a dangerous river. the Jordan River is also a dangerous river, and it was during flood season when they crossed it. It wasn't your typical river crossing. So let's look at Joshua chapter 3 in verse 14. It says, "So when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan with the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and as soon as those bearing the ark had come as far as the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped into the brink of the water, now the Jordan overflows all its banks through the time of the harvest. The waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, and those flowing down towards the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off, and the people passed over opposite Jericho." For miles, the flow of the Jordan River is interrupted. God does what only God does. A miracle is something only God can do. The river is flowing here, and it stands up in a heap. The water stands up in a heap here. And then way down here somewhere, it going this way, it starts again. So you've got this section of river that is just parted. It's just parted. God caused the waters to rise up in a heap, and the children of Israel were able to walk into the promised land on dry land. No, not mud, but on dry land. This was something their parents' generation spoke of, but they never got to experience it themselves up to this point. That was the generation that crossed the Red Sea on dry ground. Now it was their turn. God parts the Jordan River, and millions of people cross over into a new country. But God didn't want them just to receive this gift and go on. He doesn't want them to just like, hey, that was really cool. Let's try to remember that. That was really awesome. Which, by the way, I'm collecting things on the way because that's a huge event. You know, if you go there and you walk across a parted river, I don't know, I'm grabbing a fish or something out of it. You know, just I'm getting a souvenir out of the deal. That's something you want to tell people about. So I'm sure the awe and shock of that day would have been incredible for them. These people just experienced a miracle and were given a new home to establish their families in. They now they're in a new country, they're in a new land. But shock and awe are often temporary moments. Miracles get forgotten, blessings lose their shine, and people move on. So God does something intentional. God's biggest move that day wasn't parting the Jordan River. It was this right here. Look at chapter 4 and verse 2. "Take 12 men from the people, from each tribe a man, and command them, saying, Take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet stood firmly, and bring them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight. Before God returns the waters to their proper place, he commands that 12 stones are removed from the riverbed and carried." I want you to grab 12 stones where the water was, where you shouldn't be. I want you to grab stones from that location right there, and I want you to take them with you. These aren't souvenirs. They're part of God, the event that God cares most about. This is the part that, they're probably focused on the fact that they just walked across the Jordan River during flood season on dry land. They're on dry ground. They're probably in shock and awe about that. And God's like, yeah, but I'm more focused on these rocks. I want you to focus on those right there. I want you to look at the rocks, and I want you to do something here. These stones are essential for the survival of the nation. God understands people. He knows how easily we get distracted by everyday life. He also knows where he gets shuffled in the process. Because when we get really busy, how often are we really thinking about God? When the stress and anxiety builds up, how often do we think about God? When we're having a great time, how often are we thinking about God? He knows that he gets shuffled into the deck deeper, and we don't think about him when life comes at us. And that's why these stones mattered. Joshua also understood, so he obeys God's instructions here. He calls the men together and directs them back into the river. You need to go grab these rocks. Look at verse 5. "And Joshua said to them, Pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and take up each of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel. These men just experienced the greatest event of their life, that really awesome thing to see during flood season, because the river's not just a narrow river at that point. It can be miles wide at certain places. It's a lot of water, and they just got to cross over this thing. That's probably pretty impressive. They walked across on dry ground during flood season. They may have even told each other, we're never going to forget this day. There's no way. We're never going to forget this day. That was incredible. But their parents were the evidence that it was very much possible that they could forget this day. Because remember, their parents walked across the Red Sea on dry ground, and their parents are the ones not going into the Promised Land. Why aren't they going into the Promised Land? They forgot. They forgot. The previous generation walked across on the dry ground in the Red Sea and missed out on going into the Promised Land because they forgot about the goodness and the faithfulness of God that brought them that far. They forgot about the God behind everything. For some reason, it doesn't matter how great the miracle is, people tend to forget. We tend to forget. Years ago, 9/11 took place, and remember the slogan that the whole country put up after 9/11? We will never forget. We will never forget. You look at our country in 2026, a lot of people have forgotten. A lot of people have forgotten. It doesn't matter how big the event is. For some reason, people tend to forget. So God told them that the first order of business was to gather large river rocks from the middle of the Jordan River. And then Joshua told them why it was important that this is done. Look at verse 6. That this may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever. God wanted a monument made because history is lost if there's no markers. If you don't have anything to remind you, you're going to forget history. You need to have the markers. When we were in Washington, D.C., I found myself asking questions that I never had until I saw the details on the monuments and the artifacts and stuff like that. I never had those questions before. Never had them. But when I saw the details, I'm like, okay, why is that detail there? And why is this something they kept? And why is this? I had all these questions. But without the marker, I wouldn't have even had the question, which means it would have just been forgotten or never acknowledged at all. So it did work for me. Because of those markers, I developed a deeper curiosity of what everything meant in Washington, D.C., and I got a greater appreciation for what the people that went before us did. I learned so much more than I ever would have if those monuments and those archives were not there. It's essential that we leave something for the next generation to learn from. We've got to do that. The Israelites carried those stones 2 to 5 miles to Gilgal, depending on where they were in the Jordan River at that time, and I don't know where they were, but they took these stones 2 to 5 miles, sure, with a lot of breaks, carrying groceries from my van to my house. Sometimes I think I need a break. Carrying large stones on my shoulders, I'm guessing for 2 to 5 miles, I'm guessing they were going to need a few minutes to rest here and there. It was a lot of work. They were commanded to set up a memorial. The 12 men who carried them were most likely miserable doing it. They wouldn't have been small rocks. You don't build a memorial out of things that are just going to fall apart. You know, they're probably significant stones because this memorial is meant to last. And God wanted it to remain out of his love for them and those who would come after them. He wanted them to remember. When the stones arrived at Gilgal, the memorial was built, and Joshua addressed the nation with the reason why everything was done. This is why we're doing what we're doing. Look at verse 21. And he said to the people of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in times to come, what do these stones mean? Then you shall let your children know Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground. But the memorial wasn't just about the miracle of the parting of the waters. So far, that's all we've read. Like why the kids are going to ask later, what do these stones mean? And the answer so far is that we walked over on dry ground through the Jordan River. It was more than that. God's goal wasn't just to help them remember an incredible event. It was help them remember an incredible God. That's what he wanted them to know. It wasn't about this cool day we had back then. It was the God who made it possible. That's what he wants them to remember. If people knew about the river drying up, it would just be another awesome event in the history of mankind. Oh yeah, this happened. The Titanic sunk. People were saved. Okay, all right. We remember, or at least we've read about it. This happened, that happened. It's just another event. That's how it goes. But the memorial was set up for more than that. When future generations asked what the stones meant, the answer was supposed to go so much deeper than a river crossing. This is what they needed to know. Look at verse 23. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we passed over, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. Future generations were going to ask the meaning of this memorial, and the answer was supposed to include them. But I wasn't there, but he did it for you. He did it for you. Everything that you have is because of everything he did. This is the generation that's walking across the Jordan River. And he says, just as he did, as he parted the Red Sea for us. You mean for your parents? No, he did this for us. God's always done this for us. Everything he's done for us. The Lord dried up the waters for you, just as he did at the Red Sea. And he did this for us. It's God that we're remembering, not the event necessarily. He did it so that everyone on earth could know that God is mighty. He wants people to know him. It's not just about Bible trivia. And a lot of Christians look at church and the Bible and they think, if I just have more Bible facts, I'll be doing good. That's Bible trivia. You can buy the game. Go online this afternoon. Buy a Bible trivia game. It's got more questions than I know to ask you. It's got some tough ones in there. My kids used to quiz me. They grab the cards and like, Dad, like, this is a rough life. I'm living a rough life. Like, you're a pastor. Like, yes, I am. Who's the cousin of Mephibosheth? Like, go to bed. There's no way. There's just no way. But that's Bible trivia. That's just facts and information. God wants us to know the author of the book, not just the book. He wants it. The whole thing is about knowing God. But people's minds wander. You don't drift into remembrance. You drift in forgetfulness. That's where we go. We forget things. These stones were how God was protecting Israel. A memorial brings us back from forgetfulness. When you see that memorial, you're like, oh, that's right. That's right. It brings you back from forgetfulness. But the Bible never commanded us to build memorials today. There's nowhere in the Bible that says, by the way, all the children of God grab 12 stones, carry them 2 to 5 miles, and set up a memorial wherever you are. It doesn't say that. It doesn't tell us to do that. But I believe we should all build a memorial. I think every one of us should, because it brings you back to remembering. That's what a memorial's there for, is to help you remember something. So what's the memorial we all need to build? It's an altar of gratitude. That's a memorial we all need to be building. Gratitude doesn't sound like it would make a very impressive memorial, does it? Like, I'm just going to, like a pile of thank you cards. That's going to be impressive. You know, Hallmark is about to make some money. You know, we're not going to build a memorial out of gratitude. But gratitude is how we keep from forgetting. That's the idea. It's how we keep God at the center of our mind. It's how we pass faith to the next generation, is gratitude. Both baptism and communion were given to the church. And what are we supposed to do with those two things? Do it in remembrance of me. Oh, because that triggers that thought. Remember what Jesus did for you. Remember what Jesus did for you. God doesn't want us to forget him in our day-to-day lives, but for some reason, people, We tend to do it. We forget. We let things slip our minds. Before long, we're blaming God for bad things that happen, even though God's not the one that did them. Because when we do think about him, we're thinking, hey, why did you allow this? Well, if you were focused on him the whole time, you might have even missed some of that bad stuff that was happening because you were living out of gratitude. But our focus becomes on the negative instead of the positive. Gratitude's how we remind ourselves that we didn't get here by ourselves. That's what it's for. Look at Psalms 103, verse 2. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. When you say thank you, Lord, you're picking up a stone. Just follow the picture with me here. When you say thank you, that's an intentional thing. I am now focused on this piece of the memorial right here. When you say thank you, Lord, you're picking up a stone. When you testify about God's goodness, you're carrying that stone to Gilgal. I'm testifying. I'm taking this. I'm not just going to leave it here, but I'm going to share it. I'm going to make some distance with this thing. And when you tell your children how God provided, you're setting that stone in place. Gratitude is not just a feeling, it's a memorial. It keeps the mind from drifting. Forgetfulness is not a small issue in Scripture. It's a spiritual danger. God knows that blessings without remembrance becomes entitlement. Let me say that again. Blessings without remembrance becomes entitlement. And entitlement becomes rebellion. And God knows how it works. All the blessings, I'm getting all the blessings. Do you remember where you got it? Are you grateful? Do you have any thanksgiving? No, I'm enjoying all the blessings. Keep them coming. Keep the blessings coming. Before long, you're entitled. I have it coming. I deserve the blessings because, well, I'm me. That should be enough. You receive all the blessings, you become entitled, and before long, you become rebellious. And that's what happens to the nation. Back in Deuteronomy, God wanted Israel to know that the risk was there. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 12. It says, beware lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. How is it possible that a nation like Israel could ever forget about God? They saw countless miracles. The 10 plagues. They were delivered from Egypt, the Red Sea crossing, the manna in the wilderness, the water from the rock, the quail that came, the earth that opened up and swallowed people that were rebellious. I think that would have been a pretty big wake-up call at the moment. And we've got a big God. We've got a big God. The sun stands still from them. They have fire sent from heaven. You see all these things with Israel. How is it that they could ever forget about God? They experienced God's rescue in so many situations. Look at the book of Judges. They go into captivity and God rescues them. They go into captivity, God rescues them again. They even heard from God himself. They even got to hear from him, and it terrified them, but they got to hear from him. Why would God warn them not to forget? It's because it happens naturally without any thought. When life gets comfortable, people forget God. When blessings increase, pride increases. When success comes, memories fade. Gratitude brings it all back. And that's why gratitude is so important. Every time you stop to say thank you, you're reminding yourself, I didn't get here by myself. God brought me here. God's the one that sustained me. God's the one that blessed me. Gratitude turns a blessing into a place of worship. You're going to have a hard time worshiping without that gratitude. That it's so important. It turns the blessing into a place of worship. It brings our minds right back to the goodness of God. Forgetting God and his goodness brings about a different outcome. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 19. As then it shall be, if you by any means forget the Lord your God and follow other gods and serve them and worship them, I testify against you this day that you shall surely perish. When a nation fails to give thanks, the entire culture begins to crumble. And by the way, I'm saying this in real time here about our own nation. When a nation forgets to be thankful, the nation starts to crumble. It starts to fall apart. They begin to feel that the freedoms they have, the luxuries they enjoy, the blessings they receive are just the way it should be. It's just how it should be. When I turn the key on my car, it's supposed to start. When I tell my phone, which, by the way, they own us. The phones own us. I was having a conversation the other day with my family, trying to figure out something, and my youngest daughter went, "Hey, Alexa, what's the answer to this?" Like, I remember when I was a kid, you're making a trip to the library. You know the Dewey Decimal System? All the kids are like, "The what?" Yeah. You remember the cards? Yeah. You remember looking in the back of your book regularly to make sure that date wasn't coming too fast so you can get that book back? They just go, "Hey, technology, tell me everything I want to know." Just go ahead and spit it to me. And before long, you just expect it to be there for you. You just expect it to be there for you. They forget where all those benefits come from. Life just becomes handed to you, and it becomes easy. And before long, they become people who turn from God because sometimes God has to say no. And you don't tell entitled people no. And before long, your country begins to crumble. In the book of Romans, Paul is speaking to a group of people who God turned over to a debased mind or a reprobate mind. He just lets them go. Like, if that's the way they're going to think, I'm just going to let them have it. I've warned them, I've tried to help them, but they don't want to do it, and I'm just going to let them do what they want to do. Free will. Just going to let them do it. I don't want it for them, but I'm not going to force them to love me. I'm just going to let them do what they're going to do. They knew about God, but they refused to acknowledge God. They refused to turn from sin because they wanted what they wanted. But they didn't just wake up one day and decide to think like this. It doesn't happen like that. I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and I'm like, "You know what, today I'm going to rebel against God for the rest of my life." You don't just get there. It just doesn't happen. It all started with one simple act that got them to this point. And it tells us what that is in Romans. Romans chapter 1, verse 21. "For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. But they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened." Ingratitude is where a culture begins to fall apart. And you might be thinking, that just seems it's so small. Really, just not giving thanks, the whole country could fall apart? Absolutely. How did these people get to a mindset where God says, "I'm just going to turn you over to it. I'm going to step back"? How did it all start? Ingratitude. You didn't recognize God. You didn't give thanks. They just stopped being thankful. They became entitled, and that led to rebellion. So often we try to find answers to things in life. We try to solve depression and anxiety. We try to crack that code of how we can spiritually heal our nation. A lot of people are working on that, trying to figure it out. We even attempt to find the answers that might help restore relationships that we struggle with. We can just this, that, or the other thing. Maybe we can restore the relationship that we're struggling with right now. What if the answer was found in something as little as thanks? What if it was just gratitude? What if we just stopped and said, "You know what? I'm going to thank that person for what they did. I'm going to thank God for what he's done." And everybody's going to be able to see a life of gratitude for me. Gratitude can heal. God warned Israel that prosperity without gratitude would destroy them, and it did. It did destroy them. A nation can survive enemies, it can survive famine, it can survive war, but it cannot survive ingratitude. A nation cannot survive that one, because it will fall apart if there's no thanksgiving. Gratitude is where we worship God. It rewires your perspective. You begin to see blessings instead of burden. It's great. You become more joyful, less anxious, more aware of God's involvement because you see Him in everything and you're thankful that you can. Complaining